All right, let's dive into something pretty fascinating, a piece of forensic science that can literally make or break a criminal case.
I mean, it sounds so simple, right? How far away was the shot? But believe me, the answer to that one question can change everything. It can totally blow up an alibi, or it could be the key to figuring out if a death was a suicide or a homicide. It's really the first chapter in the story of what went down.
So, let's get into it. Why is this one little detail so critical? Well, because in the world of forensics, distance isn't just a number on a tape measure. Nope, it's a massive piece of the puzzle. Think about it. Knowing that firing range lets investigators put stories to the test. Did things really happen the way a witness said they did? Does the physical evidence on the body actually line up with what the suspect is claiming? This is how you start to separate the truth from the lies.
Okay, so how on earth do they figure this out? Well, the answer is pretty incredible. It's written right there in the evidence left on the victim. See, every single gunshot leaves behind its own unique signature, and forensic examiners, they're the ones trained to read it, just like reading a book.
And this process is super methodical. It's kind of like a forensic checklist, and each box they tick tells another part of that story. What they're looking for are clues left by the gunshot's intense heat, the residue it spits out, and even the tiny bits of unburned gunpowder. Each one of these things helps solve that big distance puzzle.
All right, first up we have the most dramatic clue of all, burns and singeing. This is caused by the scorching hot gases that blast out of the gun's muzzle. And if an examiner sees this, boom, they know instantly that the weapon was either pressed right against the target or was incredibly close. We're talking just centimeters away.
Next on the list is something called gunshot residue. You'll hear it called GSR. Picture this. It's a tiny cloud of soot and particles that just explodes out of the gun along with the bullet. The key thing to remember here is really simple. The closer the shot, the thicker and darker that cloud of residue is going to be. The farther away you get, the more it spreads out and just fades away.
And then you've got this really specific clue called powder tattooing. Sometimes you'll hear it called stippling. Now what this is, it's these tiny little marks on the skin. They're caused by unburned bits of gunpowder that are still flying at high speed and hit the target. The cool thing is, you can't just wipe this stuff away like you could with soot. So whether it's there or not is a huge clue, especially for figuring out those intermediate range shots.
Okay, so we've got our clues, right? We have the burns, the soot, and the tattooing. Now comes the real magic, putting it all together. How do examiners take these little observations and turn them into a real, solid estimate of the firing distance?
Well, this is where it all clicks into place. By looking at which clues are present and which are missing, an examiner can confidently sort the gunshot into one of 4 clear categories.
This chart really breaks it down for us. Look, if you see burning inside the wound itself, that's a contact shot. The muzzle was right up against the body. If you see soot and powder deposits on the skin, that's a close shot. We're talking within a few centimeters. Now, if you find that powder tattooing, but you don't see any soot, that is your classic intermediate shot, somewhere up to about a meter away. And if the area around the wound is totally clean, no residue at all, well, that tells you it was a distant shot.
So here's the really clever part. It's all about how these clues work together. Think about it. The soot particles are super light, so they don't travel very far. But the gunpowder particles are a bit heavier, so they can fly farther. That's exactly why finding tattooing without any soot is such a giveaway. It tells the examiner, hey, the gun was far enough away for all the light soot to disappear, but it was still close enough for the heavier gunpowder to make it to the target.
And this brings up a really core idea in forensics, something you have to remember. Sometimes the absence of evidence is the most important evidence of all. A perfectly clean wound entrance, no burns, no soot, no tattooing, that's not a dead end for an investigator. No way. That is the clue. It's screaming that the gun was fired from too far away for any of that residue to even reach the target.
But, just looking at the evidence isn't quite enough, especially when you're talking about a court of law. To make sure their findings are rock solid, they have to prove it, and that means rigorous scientific testing.
And the absolute gold standard for confirming these findings? It's a process called test firing. This is how you go from a really, really good educated guess to a scientifically proven fact. It's all about recreating the exact conditions of the crime, but in a controlled lab.
The process itself sounds simple, but it demands absolute precision. First, you need the actual weapon from the crime, and you need the exact same kind of ammunition. Then, you start firing it at targets from known measured distances. You might do one at 10 centimeters, another at 30, another at 60, and so on. What you're doing is building a library of what the gunshot residue pattern looks like at every possible distance.
And now for the final, crucial step. You take the pattern from the actual crime scene evidence and you compare it to all those test patterns you just created. Your goal is simple. You're playing a game of match. And when you find the test pattern, let's say it's the one you fired from 50 centimeters, that perfectly, exactly matches the pattern from the evidence, well, congratulations. You've just scientifically proven the firing distance.
So let's wrap this up. What are the big things to take away here? First, every single gunshot leaves a unique signature. Second, that signature changes in a very predictable way depending on the distance. Third, examiners are trained to read that story by looking for burns, residue, and tattooing. And finally, test firing is how they prove it all scientifically. It's a really powerful process, right? Taking these tiny microscopic clues and turning them into solid answers.
It's honestly amazing when you think about how much information they can pull from such tiny details. And it kind of makes you wonder, doesn't it? If a wound can tell this whole story about distance, what other secrets are just waiting to be found? What else can forensics tell us about those critical final moments of a crime?